Da-da-da-da-da-da. Books!
On tonight's episode of Book Reports Podcast,
Bad art.
Lion King characters,
The population of Sparta,
Sam babbles on
Hugo weaving,
the cost of nails.
and much, much more.
Welcome to Book Reports Podcast, a monthly podcast of high literary discussion and lowbrow humor. I'm Sam.
I'm Bryce Diener.
And today on the show we are joined, as always, by an excellent guest. Before we bring on the guest, we just want to mention this is the first episode since we sent our first episode out into the wild. It was adopted by a chimpanzee who had just recently lost a child and had now learned how to eat grubs and is able to fling its poo with the best of them. So it's doing...
Welcome to Podcast in the Mist.
But really, we're very happy to have all the feedback you've given us so far. It's been wonderful. Everybody who said they've been enjoying the podcast. We hope you continue to enjoy it. It's unlikely, but we hope you continue to enjoy it.
At the point of recording this, we have actually had over 50 downloads of our first episode.
Well, say.
Which, when I first came up with when I first invented all this,
Mr. Edison over here.
That's right.
Let me steal your ideas, Internet.
my honest hope was, hey, at least 30 for the first episode, like downloads.
And our moms.
And so over 50, that's incredible. I'm ecstatic about that. I had a friend who I've known a very long time. Hello, Hannah. And she had said that after listening to our first episode, that it had renewed her interest in books. And another one, my friend Alicia from work, said I talk too much. So thank you, Alicia, for that.
And any particular feedback from your mother you'd like to mention?
No, I don't think she had anything to say about me or you.
Or me in particular?
Yeah, sure. She said that she liked Sam's section more than mine. So
do twice as good today, Bryce.
Our special guest is doing so hard not to make any noise right now. We can't take it.
Okay. We'll talk about our guest, I guess. Yeah. Our guest today, our very special, very welcome guest, is Mr. Jared Dimmick.
How are you guys
Welcome, Jared.
doing? Bryce and Sam, thank you so much for having me on the show.
No, thanks a lot for willing to come along on the show. Didn't scare you off after hearing the first episode, so that's a good sign.
I actually listened to the first episode while I was folding my laundry. It was a larger pile. Perfect timing. It was great.
Did you think I talked too much?
No, I thought there was a pretty even spread.
This is a Book Reports podcast, so hopefully you have read a book.
Oh, I definitely have read a book.
But what kind of books do you read in general? Like, what's your taste?
So mostly books on leadership. I used to read a lot of fiction, like a lot of novels. Ted Dekker, he had some series that I read. The very first book series I think I ever read completely was a series of unfortunate events. I remember that being the first memory of ever loving to read, just to read for leisure.
Lemony Snicket did a lot of good to a lot of people, despite it being completely unfortunate and depressing. My goodness.
They were twisty and turny, those books.
Didn't finish that series. I got, I think, to the third book, and it just kind of felt like it was kind of the same thing over again. But I hear I missed out a lot because the later books are supposed to be really good.
It changed. It did a turnaround, so.
I watched the movie.
Yeah.
So my book for this month, which I am very excited by, is Return to Babylon, Travelers, Archaeologists, and Monuments in Mesopotamia by Brian M. Fagan. I love nonfiction, and specifically there are three things I look for in a nonfiction book. An incredibly specific subject, which this one has, a very good index in the back so that I know how good it is at covering its subject, and lots of really fun anecdotes. And that third one is where this book paid off in spades. Basically, it's a history of archaeology in Mesopotamia, which is modern-day Iraq, and it goes back to the 1100s, where this rabbi traveled around and then just continues onward in world history. It gets a little vague after World War II, but there's so many crazy things that have happened with people just traveling around trying to figure out who used to live in Mesopotamia. There's no end of incredible stories in this book. It was such a fun one. In keeping with my theme of doing a book about spies every single month by accident... It just keeps happening.
I told you not to read the Spy Kids novels, so
I can't help it. They're so good.
This is on you.
Theme.
In keeping with that theme of spies, this book had spies at the very end because in World War you had a French excavation team, an English excavation team, and a German excavation team within miles of each other.
Really?
And they were all spying at each other, and the Germans were trying to build a railroad by excavation sites, so the English archaeologists were just coincidentally watching them and hiring their diggers to spy on the Germans for them and stuff like that.
So they're all in, you said Iraq or Iran?
Yeah, it's modern day Iraq, yeah.
Okay.
And just all this crazy stuff happened in this fairly small patch of territory, because there were all these digs going on right around each other, and everybody's fighting over who gets to dig where, and there's just all this crazy diplomatic stuff happening all around these archaeological sites. For being a very dry subject, it was just completely soaked in blood. It was very exciting.
Dry.
Thank you.
Get it.
Thank you.
It's Iraq.
And what was nice too about this book is it's something I knew nothing about. There's not a darn thing I know about this subject, so anything is just gravy. And if I could, I wanted to read some excerpts. As I was saying, it's full of great anecdotes, and
I'm sorry we've run out of time.
This one is about an archaeologist named Layard, and he became really close friends with the pasha of the area, who was in charge of the place they were doing the digs.
What's a pasha?
Sort of like a local ruler.
Okay.
Yeah, sort of guy in charge of that stuff. This kindly gentleman presented him with 2 lions. The younger one soon died of mange, but the second, a full-grown specimen, was well known in the town. He was a friendly beast who everyone liked except the butchers. The lion would occupy their stalls and not allow them back until he'd eaten all their stock. When not eating meat, the lion would chase fishermen from their wicker boats and eat the succulent catfish they just landed. The pasha, wrote Layard cynically, rather encouraged a mode of obtaining daily rations which, although of questionable honesty, relieved him from butcher's bills. The lion would lie in the sun and allow little boys to pet him when he was not hungry. Like, the neat thing about this book is this guy put in interesting facts that had nothing to do with actual archaeology,
right,
because he was going through these guys' memoirs, and he's like, you know what, this is interesting. It may not have to do much with my subject matter, but it's going in the book anyway. And that was the kind of the fun of this book, was all the weird stuff that was just tangentially connected to archaeology.
Yeah.
But he decided, let's not make this a boring book. Let's make it interesting and full of fun, interesting facts. I'll just read one more of the anecdotes. At another point in time, a fellow named Woolley was trying to get the rights to be able to do a dig, and the judge just wasn't giving it to him, the local magistrate. And so he took him to court. So Woolley says, I'm not going to leave until I get the papers. In that case, replied the magistrate, you won't leave till next week. Everybody in the courtroom laughs until Woolley pulls out a revolver and points it at the magistrate. You'll not leave this room alive unless I get those papers, he shouted. Woolley's foreman also drew 2 revolvers. The court trembled in silence. The governor eventually gave him the permit, and
Eventually
gave him the permit.
Let me think about
it. Yeah, exactly. A couple of weeks later, the British consul received a visit from a high official who was complaining about it, and he said, they tried to shoot the governor. Did they really shoot him? Inquired the consul. Well, they threatened to, but they didn't actually kill him. What a pity, the consul remarked quietly. Just a book full of fun, weird, exciting anecdotes. You know, you look at the guys' lives that they had in these books, and it's incredible that they got anything done and that they had any scholarship at all on their digs. It's just a bunch of rough guys who were interested in history with no real technique when it came to archaeological excavations.
Wow.
They're breaking as many things as they actually find in some cases. It's very much the story of how archaeology grew to become more scientific and have more of a method to it and so on.
This sounds like if they made it into a movie, if they took the serious side, it could be like a George Clooney, like Matt
thriller,
Damon.
yeah.
Or if they took the more fun side, it'd be like a Seth Rogen film that I wouldn't go see.
like a 1970s dark comedy for sure, like a Michael Caine kind of thing. Yeah, I could definitely see it.
I've seen a few of those.
Yeah, there's some fun in this book.
Wow.
I'm assuming, did they find Babylon or try to find the Tower of Babel? Or
That's interesting, because there's this reoccurring thing in this book of people looking at an archaeological site and saying, oh, this is this place from the Bible, and then 50% getting it wrong and 50% getting it right.
Okay.
The Tower of Babel has been found a few times in various locations, shall we say, during the book.
They shouldn't have put it on wheels.
Yes. Tower on wheels of savings. You won't believe the mountain of savings at the Tower of Babel.
There goes that mountain again.
But no, they found all different sorts of sites. Babylon was found. One of the interesting threads throughout the whole book was very slow process of translation of cuneiform, the ancient Babylonian writing style. And like every now and then he'll pop in, oh, and they made this discovery in cuneiform, then they made this discovery, and then eventually it was cracked. But it's like a 100-year period where people were just sort of amateurishly trying to figure out this ancient writing style.
Is that one of the ones that the Rosetta Stone helped crack? Or no? Because it was like Egyptian, it was Greek, and it was
something else.
Other.
Yeah. Other.
Insert correct answer here.
Esperanto. Yeah.
Esperanto. Valley Girl.
Lol, cat. As things goes on, they get better and better and better at archaeology. One of the reasons that they got better and better at archaeology is some guys were really, really boring and really, really methodical and not very interesting, like the stories I was reading. Okay. So there are certain parts of the book where he just kind of glosses over things because they were obviously too good to write about.
Right.
Like during the 20th century, after World War II, he kind of does like a page and a half, and then we get to modern day and he just ends the book because there's nothing interesting to write about because they're doing it correctly now. Right. You know, that nobody's wrecking anything, nobody is causing any massive massacres or anything like that.
So what would you say was the most interesting discovery?
Probably when they started figuring out that they would find these like lines of dark silt, and they would just dig through them, and it turns out that's old mud walls that hadn't been made properly. So they were kind of wrecking the outlines of old cities by just thinking it's dirt. And then somebody's like, wait a second, we're finding these straight lines a lot. Those are old walls that have disintegrated. And then they start going, oh, okay, so we actually have been...
They look back, see how much they've dug out.
Well, so much of this was just finding cuneiform tablets and statues. Anything else was just sort of like trash, and if it wasn't gold, I should say too. Gold, cuneiform tablets, and statues.
Well, now we know where the Tower of Babel went.
What's all this? Yeah, exactly. Could be.
What's all this shiny yellow stuff? I don't know. Throw it in the burn
trash.
pile.
Give it to your kids.
This one looks like a necklace. I don't care.
Whatever. I think for me, my favorite personal discovery in this book, I think it's the Tigris or the Euphrates, one of the two rivers, was used to ship the archaeological artifacts down.
Okay.
And there were a lot of boat accidents. So there's a lot of stuff at the bottom of the Euphrates or Tigris, whichever one it is.
Way.
So it's just full of these massive statues that took, hundreds of guys to put on the boats. And they just down at the bottom of the Euphrates.
Oh, my word.
They would get attacked sometimes loading stuff, so some of those statues come back with bullets in them and stuff like that. It's a very interesting, turbulent book. It was a very interesting subject to read about.
Nice.
Nonfiction isn't always fun to read. What's stuff in a nonfiction book that tends to be grabbing your interest? Not subject-wise, but style-wise. Like I talked about how the anecdotes were interesting for me. What's something style-wise that's interesting in nonfiction to you that grabs your interest?
At least for me, I definitely can't stick with just like the one story. Like you had several different guys mentioned.
Oh yeah,
this book.
lots of guys.
And so I kind of have to like either have them bounce back and forth between like if there's like 5 guys or something like that, just like tell a little bit of his story, then go to this guy. If they just did one guy for an entire story, like I'd kind of get bored.
Like a biography.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what if it's interesting stuff that's happening to one person over and over again? Does that break it up for you, or do you really want different perspectives and completely different stories?
I think I want like different stories and stuff like that. I think I'd rather have that. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I think for me in nonfiction, something that's really interesting is the character or the personality of the writer.
Oh, okay.
And so to try to figure out where they're coming from or maybe their background and even just the standpoint with what they're writing about. Especially, too, if you maybe know them, if you've seen them, whether that's online or you've seen them do a discussion or a talk, or you just know a little bit about who they are already, trying to perceive the personality in the writer, if it's a nonfiction work, I think is something that is fun for me just to try to navigate and discover a little bit about kind of their world on this subject.
Now, do you enjoy books where it's like first-person nonfiction? Like, and to learn this, I went out to talk to this guy, and it's like it's almost the story of them writing the book as opposed to the actual topic of the book. Like, how far do you go into that?
Well, yeah, interesting question. I think, a lot of my nonfiction reading probably has been a little bit more first-person.
Okay.
Leaders kind of disclosing what they know to you. Just to think about, like a thought to tag off of, well, of course you're reading this, but who wrote it?
Okay.
Why? And a little bit of backstory about them.
And then a bit of their view as well, I suppose,
right.
on how things work.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Can you give us an example of, in a book where you've seen somebody's view coming out through the text?
I was also more recently reading a book on storytelling. It's called Long Story Short was the name of it. And so it's this comedian's first-person perspective on how she's gotten better at storytelling.
Okay.
And obviously she's a comedian. And so she will throw, these wisecrack jokes in there, and then she'll asterisk them.
Okay.
So you have to look down at the bottom of the page to kind of get the conclusion
that's
to this
clever.
joke.
Okay.
Or to the... And so then you go down and it's something just off the wall, but it connects it back together, and you just have to laugh.
Oh, that's
just interesting different styles of authors of how they write and what they throw into their works.
Yeah,
can just be really interesting to navigate because they're all different.
That is true.
And they're all unique.
I think probably the best example of that I could think of is probably Hunter S. Thompson. I mean, you don't read his books for the subject matter. You read them because it's written by Hunter S. Thompson. And the man literally inserts himself in the stories. I mean, there's it can be kind of interesting to have writers whose style almost overwhelms the original work in that way, where you are overwhelmed by how they've written it.
Was it the 1970s Democratic race? Was that? He was a journalist.
The primaries.
He was a journalist?
Yeah, for Rolling Stone.
But, I mean, he just, kept being a part of the story.
Right.
Well, whether or not he was in the story to begin with. I mean, the whole book is written from a first-person point of view, but some of the stories are so crazy. But at the same time, it's the late 60s. Maybe it's true. I mean...
What are you saying?
Well, the three things about Hunter S. Thompson is profanity, drugs, and gun use. I mean, and that's in real life. That's not even in the books. So for all we know, the stories could be true, or he's just a really talented writer making it up. But... that's the fun of reading Hunter S. Thompson, is how much of it is Hunter S. Thompson, how much of it is fiction in the nonfiction work. Although that book is said to be the best example of truth in journalism because of how effectively it captures the mood of what it's like to be a journalist covering Democratic primaries. You know, the late nights, the little glimpses of actually speaking to the people in charge of it, the heartbreak of being on the road continually and so on. Whether or not any of the book is actually true doesn't matter because it captured the essence of that idea so hard.
Sure. Wow.
I got pretty far afield. Sorry about that.
So, the book that I most recently read and brought before you guys is titled The War of Art, and a tagline, Break Through the Blocks and Win Your Inner Creative Battles. And this is by Stephen Pressfield. A little interesting note on him. He was actually a Marine.
Oh? So he says war of art, he means it.
His personality is just evident in this book. He's very opinionated, but in 2003 he was actually made an honorary citizen by the city of Sparta in Greece.
Oh, okay.
So this
I didn't know they were still around.
This guy is pretty interesting. But yeah,
their population stays pretty small. It's about 300.
I can go into that. His personality is all over the book. You think of just a Marine, someone who's been through, the war and whatever he saw or didn't see while he served. I'm thankful for his service, but his cold, warlike personality is kind of all over this. He's very opinionated, comes out and says what he wants to, and you catch that. You know what I mean? You're like, okay, that's probably not a fact, but...
Well, no, it's art. It doesn't have to be factual.
But, interesting enough, I chose this book because kind of like you guys, and even the fact that you guys are you're doing this podcast, you're stepping out and you're making it happen, kind of speaks to the creativity that is within you. And really what this book is about is trying to direct artists into the realization art is a war. It's almost like a struggle to get by in some cases, especially if you're going at it for like a profession or you're trying to make ends meet just through your art and what you love to do. There's struggle involved. It's almost kind of like a battle that you're fighting against whatever it is. The whole point of this book is Stephen Pressfield identifies that whatever it is, and he lets readers know, here's what you're battling. So basically, he dubs resistance the enemy that you are fighting, and that's what he calls it all throughout the book. So there's this theme of resistance, and I love the way it's written. It's just little bite-sized chunks, just a few pages.
Oh, okay,
so you can almost sit down, and just kind of digest it. I heard somewhere once that if anything you do, really, if you do it in 15-minute chunks, compartmentalize things that way, you retain much more information. So the book just helps you right off the bat. Some are longer, some are shorter, but he identifies resistance throughout the whole thing. It's the theme that kind of runs throughout it, and he lets artists know, any creatives know, that resistance is what you're battling. Myself, an artist, this book has been really interesting to read through, but you guys, specifically with just doing what you're doing with the podcast, actually stepping out to make something happen. Like there's a bit of resistance involved, I'm sure, to try to go through and work on the audio and even just to get the original setup. You had to figure out what you needed. And so whenever you're trying to create something or make something or produce something, and I think this is something that's really near and dear to my heart, just knowing that I'm a Christian and that I believe wholeheartedly that there is a creator God, and realizing I'm made in his image and that I'm a creator also, and if I don't create, or if I'm not creative, or if I don't use that ability that I believe everybody's been given, I'm kind of almost shorthanding God and what he's done by making me. I believe he's created so that his creation can create. And so this book is really, even though it's written from a Marine's very cold, opinionated point of view, this book has really spoken to me and helped me to actually identify resistance in my own life and be able to beat it.
Nice.
And so just to give you some examples of what that looks like, I pulled out a few pages here, not the whole pages that I'm going to read, but they're actually quotes on these pages.
He ripped them out.
I'm going to read for you because it's just kind of eye-opening. And so anybody out there really who realizes that there's something that they want to pursue, to turn something into something that isn't yet, or just to start from scratch and push forward to try to achieve the goal or the dream that's in their heart. This is super helpful, and so I hope you can take it and just use it in your day-to-day. He dubs fear as a form of resistance. And so he asks the reader this question. He says, "Are you paralyzed with fear? If you are, that's a good sign. Here's why. Like self-doubt, fear is an indicator. Fear tells you what you need to do." And so the whole book, written this way, helped me flip my thoughts on, okay, how am I thinking about things like fear that could hold me back and keep me from achieving? If I can get a different perspective, I can actually push through and make something happen. Because how many times do we let, in our own lives, fear hold us back?
Sure.
Or choke us off, or keep us from? And so if you can realize that fear itself isn't really the enemy you're fighting against in that case, the resistance keeping you from, dubbing itself as fear, keeping you from your goal or your dream or your vision, that's the thing you need to go after. And so fear is almost kind of like the symptom in a way, whereas if you can identify resistance as the true enemy, as the root of the symptom, if you can attack it, I think you can push past some fears that you have and realize not only, yes, I'm afraid, but wow, I'm afraid because that's something I need to pursue. And I think a lot of times fear just keeps people from creating and from making. And so if you can identify your fears and kind of switch it in your mind to something that you need to embrace and step into rather than something you need to avoid, I think you're going to step one step further into artistry or into creativity or into whatever it is that you have before you.
Can we stop and talk about that before
Yeah,
we get to
yeah,
because there's a lot in that
for sure.
bit that's worth talking about.
Yeah.
Was there?
Bryce, as a non-creative type, what do you think about this?
I'm not crying. I've been chopping onions.
I think it's interesting talking about fear as a motivator and fear kind of leading us to greater creativity. Because that is kind of how you begin to push yourself into places people haven't been before.
Right.
The idea, no, you can't go there, that's too crazy or that's too far away, is usually what leads to great artistic achievement. I mean, how many of us would like to go and make The Lord of the Rings as 3 movies, in New Zealand with, barely a budget and a bunch of people who only made small schlocky movies before.
Right.
Hugo Weaving is not schlocky.
Mr. Anderson. He was also in Babe, by the way.
Was he? Was he the pig?
No, yes, he was. I want my mom. No, he played the dog that doesn't like Babe very much and then gets the sheep to... Anyway.
We're going to cut all this.
But I think it's interesting to think about how fear can be a driving force. If something isn't scary, it's beyond reasonable doubt that somebody's already done it before.
One of the things I was thinking about when you were talking, when I wasn't listening to you, I remember I went to New York City several years ago, and we went to the Guggenheim Museum, which is like this... It's a big, like, cylinder type of building.
Yeah,
it's a spiral.
Right.
And the whole center is hollow. And the art that they had in the spiral was by one artist. And it was really just boring. It was bales of, like, cotton underneath, like, large boulders.
Yeah.
And I was like, this isn't art. And my brother said, you can't say that's not art. You can only say it's bad art. It's like, well, then this is really bad art. But in a side room, this... other artist had won a contest by the Guggenheim, and he was given $10,000 to do whatever he wanted in this room. And so he got 10,000 single-dollar bills and nailed them to the walls. And it's so simple, and it's like, oh yeah, $10,000, here's $10,000. And it was neat to be in this room, because like you realize... I've probably never seen this
much the nails cost. If he spent $10,000, he's over budget.
Well, the bookshelves were falling apart. So.
All the floor planks were curling up. Nobody could step anywhere.
That's right. You realize, like, it's so simple in its idea, But then you realize, like, I've probably never been around this much money in my entire life at one time. Right. Almost beautiful in the sense, like, I was surrounded by so much money that I've seen every day. And, like, but, like, when you see, like, 10,000 of them, and you're like, this is, like, beautiful in its own simplicity.
I do like the idea of not being able to call something not art, but able to call it bad art. That's
you can't call anything not art, but you can definitely say it's bad art.
I mean, that's kind of interesting. Like, I couldn't say, this is not a book, it's just merely a good book, something like that. It's interesting. You can't deny fundamentally what it is, but you can deny the quality of it.
That's right.
Yeah, that's
open your pretty fun.
Personal preference.
And then also what I was thinking of while you were talking and I wasn't listening was heard that if you go skydiving for the first time, it's like, okay, on the count of 3, 1, 2, and they push you out on 2, because on 3, people grab onto the sides of the plane, and they don't let go, and they don't want to jump because they're afraid. Whereas if you push them on 2, they aren't ready for it, and they say that once you're out of the plane, there's no reason to be afraid anymore because you've already made the choice. And they said,
I don't know about that. I'm dubious about this.
There's less fear.
Once you step out of the shark cage, all fear leaves you. There's nothing to worry
because you're already dead. Once you've already jumped the water. No, but they said, like, because you're just falling and it's so silent. Right. It's just the wind, and it's a very peaceful moment compared to all the fears that were up there.
Compared to the screaming that... oh, goodness.
Oh, my.
I'm just saying what they've told me, okay?
Yeah.
Book Reports podcast. I'm only saying what they told me.
It is advice. It's not good advice. How about that?
There you go. Perfect.
So I'm curious, how did you find this book?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question.
So, actually...
Thanks, that's why I asked it.
Yeah.
Read another book of another leader that they read this book.
Oh, okay.
And they recommended it.
And so they mentioned it in their book.
They recommended it. But then this is something else that this book kind of presents and brings to the table amongst so many other things. And I have to forewarn any readers out there, if you do go pick this book up, there's some colorful marine language in it.
Well, I almost feel like a book by a marine, you almost would feel disappointed. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
Yeah, I mean, if it's written by a marine,
my gosh, darn it, kids!
read the gall darn book.
So by no means want to shock anybody in that way, but at the same time, it really makes some awesome point. There's a lot of truth found here. Like I said, there's a lot of opinion and things that probably aren't necessarily the truth, but there are a lot of things that you really can say, wow, like that's right, like you're right on there. And so this is just another one of those things, and it was so helpful for me because he actually identifies procrastination to be another form of resistance. So maybe a little bit similar to fear, but in a different way. I think procrastination is something we all struggle with in one way or another, and we find ourselves just wanting to not do anything as opposed to do something. This is very interesting, and this kind of got me thinking when he was talking about procrastination being the most common, he says, manifestation of resistance, because it's the easiest one to rationalize. I think it's interesting that if you trace roots of words back, which is something else that I just find interesting, if you trace roots of words back, you guys have obviously heard of your inner muse. And it's something that you can channel, the creative, inspiring part of you that is Greek mythology. Apparently, they thought that was something that was there. And,
the 9 muses.
And the muses were actually the goddesses to inspire.
Mine's Terpsichore, goddess
the
of
creative, artistic expression within people. The root of that word in Greek actually can be more closely translated to mean to create or to inspire.
Okay. That makes sense.
And it's also got roots in French origin as well. And when you bring it together, word amuse we actually get from the blend of the Greek and the French. When you add the prefix in front of a word in the Greek, it actually negates it.
Okay.
And so you're simply saying not to.
Okay.
By adding it on top or on front of the word.
So amuse is not to create?
And so not to create. Or not to inspire. And so when
is that why you hate amusement parks?
That is exactly
when you
why.
think about spots and like I don't think all amusement is bad. Don't hear me say that. But when you think about it, a lot of times when you procrastinate or you find yourself in a place where you're not doing much of anything and you're in a state of amusement, you're not acting out in the way that I think you were designed and actually created to behave, to make, to produce, to put your touch on the world. A lot of times when I find myself procrastinating, I put myself in a place where I don't really have to think. or do much of anything. I can just kind of veg, and a lot of times that's amusement. I think an appropriate amount of amusement is okay, but a lot of times I'll just deem amusement as resistance, and I need to get up and do something instead of sitting here for the next 3 hours, watching YouTube videos, and just scrolling through and eventually finding myself on car scene bike chases or whatever it is that you stumble upon.
Cat videos, you can say it. You're in a
safe
place.
This is a safe place.
And so,
I think it's very interesting to talk about amusement being not creativity, because most of our amusement is partaking in something somebody created. Granted, there are some lame amusements out there, but for the most part, it's because somebody went there first and created and had that drive to make something.
Right.
Hopefully,
like a podcast.
We hope you gained some amusement from this month's episode.
Get back to work. after my
books. I think it's really, hopefully then, the things that I allow myself to be entertained by, hopefully are things that lead me to then go and create as well.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
It's very interesting that amusement is not create, because so much of our entertainment is passive. Or I should say, entertainment we allow ourselves to be passive during. Do you actually stop and try to figure out who the murderer is on NCIS, or do you just let it flow along? How passive is the entertainment you're taking in is, I think, a good thing to be able to think about as you're doing stuff. One of my favorite things to do is watch terrible movies. There's something really enjoyable about a really badly made movie. And what's really neat about bad movies is if you're not going to be passive as you watch them, you can start to figure out how things can be better and what things are honestly really great about this movie. And you can start to see, where the script broke down, things that just don't connect, and so you can start analyzing it and have that kind of fun too. And if you do this on everything that you enjoy doing, so much fun can be had from not being passive in your entertainment choices, and that can then drive you to create, I think.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
By allowing your amusement to drive your creativity.
I think you're spot on. I remember something you said in podcast number 1, which, go listen.
Whoa.
Go back. Catch it. It's there. It's buried. You got to find it. But you talked about how, you when you do read a book, even from an author's perspective, maybe that you don't agree with, you're just trying to search for or discover what's there. You're doing something that you could be passive at, instead choosing to be active and engaged with it, even if it is something that is amusing. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with amusement. That's not what I'm trying to say.
We do need that too.
The way you approach it, though, I think can either push you further and into what you want or hope for.
It can also make you a lousy person to watch TV shows. I'm not going to lie. You are going to suffer for your choice of amusement if you choose to actively watch television, mostly by yelling at commercials and becoming frustrated by Murder, She Wrote. But Diagnosis Murder will treat you just fine. I guarantee that. That is the downside. It's my curse.
You had mentioned about procrastination and stuff like that. Just briefly there, and that reminded me. Someone had told me once they had considered going back to college or something like that, even though they were like in their 30s or something like that, and they were thinking oh man, this is by the time I graduate, I'm going to be 40 years old. And
basically
or something
dead,
halfway in the grave. but their spouse or whoever it was that they were talking to said, at the end of the time, you're still going to be 40 years old, whether you've gone to college or not. You might as well have something to show for it. Wow. And that's something that's stuck with me. And when I think about something in terms of its long term, if it's going to take me several months to do, or if it's going to take me several years to do, like a project or whatever it is, I have to remind myself I'm going to reach that point anyway. I might as well have something to show for it. And so that's kind of the kick in the pants that I need.
Right.
That I might as well do it. I might as well make myself a better person.
Actually, talking about procrastination and why we do stuff, I do find that most of the problems I have when it comes to doing a creative project are based solely on procrastination.
Wow.
I do a blog post every week for my blog. How about that? And I either over-research it or I under-research it. Now, I've over-researched it because I procrastinated the actual writing part, or I've under-researched it because I procrastinated the research part. And in either case, it's going to be a rough post to write. Just get up and do something. That's what we're saying. Or sit down and do something. I don't care about your position. Lay down and read a book. I don't care. Do something. Jump up and down.
Or listen to a podcast.
Yeah, go listen to a podcast.
This is our 5th episode. There's plenty more.
And they're just getting better and better and better. I guarantee it.
And if you're a creative, this book is a great read, and it really confronts a lot of the issues that you're probably facing and didn't know that they were, in fact, resistance. And so Stephen does an incredible job of transforming your mind and helping you to think of the world in a new way. So great perspective from this author. And like I said, despite his personality that is painted all over the innards of the book, I think you're really going to benefit if you're someone who likes to express themselves and loves art and loves to create things. You're going to benefit from this read. I thought it was great.
Thank you for reading a book. And before I intro my book, I want to start out by just letting you know that before I got into this, like, my general view of art, I didn't appreciate painting or like styles like Art Greco and like different like styles. Like,
Art Greco, wasn't he the host of a game show?
Yeah.
Good old Art Greco.
I'm Art Greco. Well,
It's a good name.
like different like styles, like different periods of art. I didn't care, I guess. And then after reading this book, I'd say I'm still in the same boat, but I appreciate.
But the boat's smaller.
But I appreciate it for different reasons, and so we're going to get into that. Because the book I read for this episode is called The Monuments Men, Allied Heroes, Nazi Thieves, and the Greatest Treasure Hunt in History by Robert Edsel with Brett Witter. And so what this is the true story of a division during World War II. It follows this group called the MFAA. Mufa. That's the oldest lion in Lion King.
Simba, I'm your father, Mufa.
And that's
Timon and Pumbaa.
Wasn't that the voice of Art Greco?
Come on down, Timon and Pumbaa.
And so MFAA stands for Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archive. As they were going into the European theater of World War II, there were centuries of ancient history that they had to watch out for to make sure, like, hey, we hear that the enemy is in this old church. Can we shoot cannons at it to try and kill the enemy inside? No, that's been around since the 1500s. It'd be really great if you didn't.
Although they did later on during the invasion of Italy.
There's the famous
the
Battle of Monte Cassino.
Yeah.
This beautiful cathedral, and the Allies were convinced that the Italians were in there, and so they blew it up with artillery fire, and they get up there finally, weeks later, once they finally got that land, and they realized that there were no Italians.
Just a bunch
because the Italians respected the Monte Cassino, and that's like when the MFAA guys really had to come in, exerting their authority and saying, listen, there's a lot of stuff here that we need to respect. And there's a lot of...
Just imagining a map that says Louvre, there's a whole bunch of red arrows pointed right out. Like, no.
A lot of, like, pushing the tanks forward on the giant map.
No, let's go around it.
And the thing is, too, like, they had heard that Adolf Hitler had collected a lot of the art, like train cars of like 30 or so trains leaving France and stuff full of art. Adolf Hitler got the first rights of, I want this painting, I want this one, and then like Heinrich Himmler, Goering, and like it would just go down the list of like, okay, you get to go next, you get to go next.
Like a book club, really. Yeah. Just somebody's copy of the Yasser who just passed around.
That's right. But instead it was like priceless works of art.
Well, it doesn't really match the floor, so...
You can have it, Hitler, I guess. One of the big ones he wanted was called the Ghent Altarpiece, Ghent, if you want to look it up. It was in Belgium, and it was like about 20 pieces that like kind of like go together, kind of like
panels.
I googled a lot of this stuff. I think Google is really impressed by me, by all the Rembrandts and.
So your Google profile that Google uses to figure out what ads to show you is really highbrow now.
That's right. He was taking in all this. There was also, when they were clearing out the ghettos of all the Jews, they would take all of their silverware, they would take their furniture. There were train cars full of just furniture. They took all their paintings and stuff like that, and they would just help themselves to all this stuff. Goering was one of the big ones about art, like more than Hitler was. He would just 30 train cars of his personal train, and every time he needed a new train car, just hook one up, we'll fill it up with more paintings. It doesn't matter. Even after Hitler at the end had killed himself, he was still kind of running around with his train cars, making it to the last safe havens for Nazis at the end of World War II with his train cars full of stolen art.
So now these train cars just stayed full of art.
Yeah, and so like he was kind of hoping to make a deal with Eisenhower at the end and hoping that he could probably keep some of them.
At what point in the war was this happening?
It really starts taking place before D-Day. They had mentioned
43?
Something like
43?
And then it goes into post World War II about maybe 4 or 5 years, and at the end it just touched on each person that they had mentioned in the book, what happened, like what jobs they got afterwards. One thing I wanted to mention at the beginning here, a little excerpt, since we're all doing excerpts.
It's the theme of the episode.
They had mentioned at the very beginning about there's a man named Paul Sachs. Now, if you've heard of Goldman Sachs, the like banking investment company, his grandfather on his maternal side was that Sachs of Goldman Sachs. Okay. And so he, even though like during Great Depression, he is still well off. He is like...
So he's that rich where the Depression was just sort of Tuesday.
And so he like starts the school of creating curators for museums and stuff like that. And that's where a lot of these guys come out of is these, he was very influential, and there's just a small paragraph that says how influential was Paul Sachs. Because he was short, about 5'2", he hung paintings low on the wall. When American museums rose in prominence after the war, many of the directors hung their paintings low compared to their counterparts in Europe because Sachs's students had simply accepted it as the norm, and other museums followed. And I think that's so cool. There's a nice little excerpt about just this one man's personal influence on art just because of his height.
I am sending Mr. Sachs my neck brace bill. Thank you very much. I'm in pain.
From looking too low?
Looking too low. It kind of reminds me of Franklin Lloyd Wright, the architect. He was a fairly short man too, and he would build to his scale. So if you wanted a home that was designed by Franklin Lloyd Wright, you'd have to just kind of add a foot or so to make it an average height man. So that was kind of a...
Yeah, that's funny.
About a week or two before the invasion of D-Day, I believe it was June 6th, like a couple weeks before that, Eisenhower, who is in charge of all of the armed forces, if you remember, not just the Americans, but he's in charge of the British, the Canadians, the French, as they take the beaches.
He's a great administrator.
Yeah. He sends out this release. There's a lot of important monuments that we need to protect. There's a lot of history. It's not just European history, it's world history. And regardless of whether it's the Germans having it or not, we need to protect it. But if it costs us our lives, we're still going to destroy it because human lives are more important than history. But he wanted to make that known to them that you guys are going in with these gas guzzling tanks, like all this stuff. Just be careful of like the roads that you're on. Be careful of with the walls and stuff like that. There's one guy that's mentioned in here named James Rorimer. Every time he showed up in the book, I kind of got a smile on my face because he is my favorite guy in this whole book. Like, yeah, James is back. There's one point, he only ever got to the rank of private. There's a gentleman named George Stout who was the head of the MFAA who became like a major or a captain or something like that. James Romer only became a private. He went up to the sergeant who, with his tank brigade, was about to knock over this wall, and James looked on the other side, and there's these two stone statues, and he's like, oh, these are probably important, we can't knock these down. You guys are about to knock down this wall, there's important stuff on the other side, and it's like, look here, private, you can't tell me what to do. And James pulls out the Eisenhower letter, the letter that says you can't knock
see why he's still a private.
And so he says, what do you think the Supreme Commander says here? What do you think he says here? And the guy's like, oh, fine. So they don't knock over the wall. He's like throwing authority around, and I love that guy. There's a section later where they've already invaded Germany at this point, and James wants to create building points for them to pull all the art into as they're finding the art, like bring them to these checkpoints. And so it's like the old like Nazi headquarter building. There's just like these famous institutions. General Patton also wants these buildings.
Oh, right.
And James Rorimer gets the buildings, not General Patton, because he's saying the art is so important. It's like this private.
I can see why he was still a private. Yeah.
Right. But it's like this private is like bossing General Patton around almost.
So he's like the hero of this book.
He's my hero.
The unsung hero.
The other gentleman I had mentioned, George Stout, was in charge of the MFAA. These guys all kind of reported to him. He reported to his superiors who reported to Eisenhower and all that stuff. I definitely see him being like your kind of figure, Sam.
Okay.
Like I see myself as James Rorimer. Just like that. Every time James was mentioned.
Was he really handsome and well-spoken and attractive to ladies?
His photo is right there, actually.
Oh, all these things are true. He's basically me.
No, that's James.
Wait.
Oh, okay.
No, that is Sam.
Yeah, see?
Folks, I've pointed out a photo of James Rorimer. Everyone is clapping.
Yes.
George Stout, he was in charge of all them. Early, I think it was like a day or two after D-Day, all the monuments men who were on the continent of Europe had agreed to get together, make sure, hey, you're going to take this section, okay, I'll take this section. They're like, we don't have like typewriters to type anything up. We don't have like anything. We don't have vehicles. We need to like hitch rides on like the tanks that happen to be going that direction. All of a sudden, this VW Bug rolls up without a windshield, without a roof, and there's a gentleman driving it with like the pilot's glasses and like a scarf in like a suit. And it's George Stout.
Yeah, that's me. You're right.
And they're like, where'd you get this? This is incredible. He's like, well, the Germans just kind of left it, and I commandeered it. So he just took a beat up bug. He had it to the end of the war. He drove it all over Europe, like thousands of miles all over Europe.
Reliable cars from
That's
the
a
40s.
Volkswagen for you.
Yeah, really.
Today's episode brought to you by Volkswagen. There was one point he was on the front lines, like just a few hundred yards away from the Germans, and there was this cabin that, for some reason, had a painting in it. And so he got pulled up there, and he's just just measuring it, looking at like how it has degraded over time, deteriorated. Meanwhile, there's like bullet like coming from the outside. He's unfazed. He's like so concerned about this painting.
It's like a scene out of Mr. Bean.
They did make this into a movie.
Okay.
The Monuments Men. I did look up the characters. They don't name them James Rorimer or George Stout. They give them just fake.
Oh, are they combinations of people from the book?
I think so, because there's not as many people in the movie. I think
makes sense.
As this.
That makes
so
sense.
they kind of just gave them fake names. But when you look it up, Matt Damon does play James Rorimer. And I was like, so, if I've ever been confused with Matt Damon, it's because of James Rorimer.
That's why. Yeah.
And the person who plays George Stout is George Clooney.
All right.
So, Sam, if you've ever been confused for George Clooney, you know why.
Constantly. I
had mentioned at the beginning, I didn't have an appreciation for art. But after reading this book, I appreciate it more because of the importance that it has been given because of history. That's where I realized its historical value. And that's what made me appreciate it. I still can't go to a museum and just stand there and appreciate the Art Deco or like the Monets and the Rembrandts and stuff like that, but I can appreciate if I can get like a backstory of it. In a week or so, I'm actually going to the Art Institute of Chicago, and I had contacted them before.
Of Ferris Bueller's Day Off fame?
That's right.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
That's right. But I had contacted the museum, and I was like, I just got done reading this book. Are there any paintings that the Monuments Men had saved things? And they said there was at least one bust, and there was like another painting. When I go there, I'm actually going to try and like look out for where these are, because they gave me the gallery numbers, and so I think I can actually appreciate that work of art more, knowing that it was stolen by the Nazis. And like the book says, the greatest treasure hunt in history. Definitely made me appreciate this artwork more, that people were willing, like George Stout, to stand within several hundred yards of the enemy, or James Rorimer to stand up to these generals, because art was so important.
Art's value is completely based on how much people are willing to pay for it, and the cost of art, fluctuates with the market and so on. What values do you look for in art? Like you're saying that you appreciate art based on its history, its past.
Right.
Now? Or is there anything else that you look in art and say, hey, this is something I commonly find value in?
Like I can't say that if you were to enter my room, I'd tell you to get out. But before, you would notice I do have stuff like hanging on my walls. Like I have like prints. Like I like
Hanson posters.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
with lots of kiss marks on.
Lots of kiss marks.
That is good art. And that, my friends,
Bob
is good art. Good art.
Anyway,
so what's in your room?
Yeah, there's one right above my desk that's a pier going into a lake.
Okay.
I really like that one. I have a Big Ben, the tower.
Okay.
London.
Okay.
Just like different photos from magazines that I've kind of clipped out and just hung on my walls of like, I have one of Gordon Ramsay, the chef, just because I appreciate him as a human being.
See, that's what I mean. It's the relative value to you.
Even though it was printed in a magazine that I got for free, it meant something to me. Like I said, you can't say it's not art, or you can say it's bad art, or you can say it's good art.
And that also helps us connect why there's so much emotional attachment to artwork, and why it's almost offensive or insulting or hurtful, to pinpoint someone's work or creation. And it's near to your heart because it is. It's something that you created. It's an expression of yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think you're talking about emotion in art. I mean, if you think about it, there wasn't a lot of art that the Western world valued. I mean, there's art in China and Asia and so on.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of art that the Western world valued outside of Europe. To have somebody just kind of go, oh, Europe, mine, I'll take that, thank you. It's good, as the Germans did. It was called Fortress Europe for a reason. They overran pretty much all of Europe at the time, which means they overran all of the art world. They were able to sort of take the soul of almost everybody in Europe away, and to take everything that we kind of held dear as Western culture is just sort of owned by the enemy now.
Right.
It must have been horrifying.
Wow.
Small towns that would have like one Michelangelo statue.
Yeah.
They prided that so much. There was one point, one of the gentlemen, not George or James, so I didn't care.
Yeah. Not you or me. Yeah.
The Germans had just gotten pushed past this one town that had a famous statue. Their monuments man said, okay, we got to get this statue back into a safe spot. And the people of the town that were still there, like maybe like 30 people, they were like, no, that
That's our statue.
That's our statue. That's been here for centuries. That can't leave. Is there a basement we can put it in? So, like, all these townspeople start carrying this, like, heavy statue through the snow, so they could have, like, dropped it at any time.
Right.
And they store it in this basement and, like, kind of, like, protected, like, with some, like, mattresses or something like that, just in case the Germans are able to push back. I think as our troops were pushing in further, they realized that our monuments men and our troops wanted to preserve their history, and so towns were more willing to kind of go along with the Americans, whereas the Germans were like, we're taking this.
Yeah.
Well,
There was one final section here I wanted to talk about. And I think it really sums up Hitler kind of well. But the lasting impact of his bitter reign is best measured in more emphatical ways. 50 million loved ones who never returned home from the war to rejoin their families or start one of their own. Brilliant, creative contributions never made to our world because scientists, artists, and inventors lost their lives too early or were never born. Cultures built over generations reduced to ashes and rubble because one human being judged groups of other human beings less worthy than his own. I've heard people say, like, there's never going to be another Holocaust, like, we would never let that happen. It's like the thing that people forget about Hitler is that he was a human being.
Well,
there's so many bad things he's done, like, we always need to be careful of, kind of like the wolf
Dignifying him.
the wolves in sheep's clothing.
Well, the Nazis make such great villains, and they've willingly made themselves such great villains. I mean, look at how well they dress. I mean, if you want a good villain, make him a Nazi. They're well dressed, they're intelligent, and they've got the resources for it, and they willingly were so evil. The way they were willing to so coldly allocate resources towards human achievement, quote unquote, all the technical achievements they were able to create at the cost of their own souls, effectively.
Some people think he was just like a demon on Earth. This guy lived, he breathed, he ate food, and it definitely can happen again. It's good.
Well, and had happened previously before the Holocaust.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, genocide is nothing brand new. I mean, it's not the first time we've all said, hey, let's pick on one group of people and get rid of them.
right.
And I think that's what's so scary about saying this will never happen again, so we don't have to worry about it. We always have to be on the constant vigilance of this can happen again, and we need to constantly be watching out for, just because they aren't like me doesn't mean that they don't have as much right as me. And that should do it for our episode. I want to give a special thanks to Jared Dimmick. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. You are with rapper Tristan Peace. You are a part of his his gang.
Absolutely. If you want to go check out Tristan Peace, make some awesome music. We're actually working on a new album right now together, and it's the first time I've actually gotten to collaborate on that creative part with him. So look for that soon. It's going to be called Delaware Heights. That's coming out. Check out Tristan, support him. Great guy. Great creative. So
this is a big name drop for you. You guys were at South by Southwest, or you're going?
No, we were there.
That's just the direction they were headed.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And now we're back at North by Northeast. No, we were down at the festival. It was a great time, great opportunity for us to make connections and meet people in the industry who could really help us and maybe push us further. So, we had a great time.
I think that's just so impressive because that's a music festival I haven't been to, but I've heard of. So that's how I know it's big.
Bryce only goes to the small hipstery music festival
that's
everybody's
right.
heard of. In the Grove. Yeah.
No, thank you guys so much for having me. It's been my pleasure to be here.
Oh, thanks so much for
Thank
joining
you.
us in the
Enjoy
conversation.
listening to your podcast.
Oh, well, thank you. We got a fan.
Yes, this is our first time to have somebody actually listen to the podcast before recording.
If you enjoyed listening to the podcast, be sure to look us up on SoundCloud.com under Book Reports Podcast or under iTunes. Please rate us, hopefully positive ratings, but that helps us, gets our name out there, lets other people discover us as well. Be sure to look us up and like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Book Reports Podcast. You can email us at bookreportspodcast@gmail.com. And you can check out Sam's blog that he had mentioned earlier at skullduggeryinsmoke.blogspot.com. Our theme song today was produced by Kevin MacLeod. Thank you for that. And we will see you next episode. Do you have any problem with us using your full name?
Can you actually call me Christopher Columbo?
Happily. Just one more voyage. Just one more voyage.
Don't throw me in prison.
Sorry about all the slaves. We're sorry. We're sorry about that.
wasn't his.
Where'd you get those ships?
Sorry about all the disease.
Malaria.